stuff, I think, will add to that literature for those reasons. Yeah.
Can you go to the slide? We have future direction.
Sure.
So I'm interested in, I know these are planned studies, but detecting the cancer detection studies that you're planning to do. And I'm wondering, is that from the perspective of the doctor who's detecting cancer, or you doing self-exam of your breast or whatever? Which is it?
It's from the view of the patient. So the seeking care behaviors, essentially.
So there, it seems like fear would be overriding threat, fear, anxiety, right? So could you tell us a little bit more about what you're planning and how fear comes into it?
Sure. Yeah, so I didn't mean to give the impression that I'm like only interested in anger. I'm interested in all kinds of emotional experiences, and we just focused on anger in those studies for the reasons I mentioned to you earlier. But yeah, so in those studies, what we're going to do is actually they do a stress induction, which is a modified Trier, so a Trier is a stress task where you usually have to do some mental math, and then you have to give like a speech in front of a panel of people, usually adults like in lab coats, who give you no positive social reinforcement. And you're also like told you're going to give the speech like 5 minutes ahead of time. And they're like, you have 3 minutes to prepare for this 10-minute speech, go. And so it's very stress-inducing. Both in terms of self-report and physiological measures. And there's important individual differences in how people react to those stresses. But we're going to use a modified version where they have to give a speech about cancer in particular, actually. So we're going to try to make it not just generalized stress, but like cancer-relevant stress, and maybe like some mortality salience, essentially, right? If you're going to talk about why it's important to detect cancer and why it's important to use preventative measures and things like that. So their speech will be cancer-relevant also. And then they'll do tasks where they make decisions about either a series of moles that vary in terms of their benign to malignantness, but are perceptually uncertain, as well as, some models of breasts where they're going to feel for different lumps of different sizes and consistencies and things like that. And what the bulk of the experiment is actually manipulating the parameters of the decision task. So how alike are the benign and malignant cues? How risky is it to be wrong? How many malignant versus benign cues do you encounter, and things like that. And so we really want to start teasing apart like where that'll help us tease apart which parameter stress influences. So like if stress influences overall decision making about cancer detection, is it influencing sensitivity? Is it influencing bias? Is it influencing base rate estimates or costs? And so the ICEF is just like a parameterized model that like suggests these potential causal mediators. And so by varying the decision-making task, we can kind of separate out where it's having its influence. Yeah?
Do you think that in that case it's going to be on the actual perception of difference? I think that's suspicious looking, or if it's going to be more in the seeking of care and all of the kind of seeing doctors, like the potential for doctors being biased, the fact that people can't afford it because insurance leaves you with giant cookies even if you have it. So do you think that that's primarily where would you predict the differences are, and are you looking at decision making around seeking care as well?
Yeah, so it's mostly going to be, the assumption here will be like if they think it's malignant, they would seek care. And so it'll be framed in that way when they make the decisions. My guess would be that it'll influence response bias. So like their tendency to see it as malignant, their tendency to seek care, as opposed to their ability to distinguish between the two. I feel like whenever you do these tests, you want it to be their ability to distinguish between the two, but more often we see movement, especially in all of the emotion studies I've done, on response bias. And so there I would expect it to affect their relative expectancy of like having cancer, or how costly they think it would be to miss cancer if they had it. But those will like interact with individual differences, and things like that.
And that's just made me think about the different predictions one might make for self versus other. That is so, and I'm wondering if you're thinking about something. So in all of these tasks, I mean, there is this fear that the gun could be used against you, but you're sort of making a more generalized, judgment about its presence in the environment. And I'm thinking about the cancer situation. I mean, fear can lead lots of people to decrease the likelihood when it leads to when it's about the self, and perhaps increase the likelihood when it's about others more generally. So I'm just wondering whether that's something you've thought about, or maybe I'm off base here. I don't know. But what? You have a follow-up? Oh, okay. But because I mean, your prediction is that people are more likely to perceive malignancy, correct? It would be really interesting to see
if that's just for them, yeah, or for someone else.
Versus you get people to really think about it for the self.
Like as a defensive.
Yeah, very defensive. I could easily imagine operating.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be very interesting, and that's something that it might be nice to manipulate in these studies, actually. And especially, you could even like move it out, where it's like, is just for you? What about for you and your husband? What about for you and your family? What about for your in-group? But I also think that, I mean, a lot of the emotion biases, probability estimate stuff I'm familiar with shows that it's more for the self than for others. So like Lerner and Keltner did that stuff, or not Keltner, it's just Lerner and like Small and Fishoff. They did the work after 9/11 demonstrating that fear made people think that they're more at risk, but didn't think the average American was more at risk. Right. So it was like really self.
And part of that is the assumption that you can then do something about it. Whereas this whole, as opposed to now if you have cancer, you're going to get care, but it's already the diagnosis. As opposed to the whatever. They're just hypotheticals to consider. Later.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, very great. Yeah.
So I actually had a lingering question. I just want to ask if you measured, which would be a good way to see if what she's saying is right, which I actually hadn't noticed. But in some of your later studies, you had asked people or manipulated their expectancies. I wondered if in any of those studies you measured expectancies. Because if you did, that would allow you to see whether in a neutral condition, whether your sort of response, which I think is a reasonable one, that in an everyday life, when you see those scenes, you don't expect to see them. The expectancy should be lower. Whereas, and that would allow you to make the argument that that 40% is what people normally think, or even less. But so that would be. But I think her point, absent that, is a good one.
But it's not everyday life; it's an experiment.
Right. But in an experiment, when you see those scenes of a college campus,
it looks like a college student carrying a gun.
It's
looks like a guy from the '90s carrying a gun. It's got like.
Even by virtue of asking people, are they carrying a gun? I mean, I don't walk around everyday life on campus.
Yeah.
People are carrying guns.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
It's one way to measure it before you can do such.
Yeah.
That's actually not. What I was going to ask is about that first bullet point.
Oh.
Because there's a lot, I spend a lot of time and there's a lot of attention in the field on different ways of measuring things that are susceptible to bias, either because of social desirability or, what I think more importantly, things that we just don't know about ourselves.
Right.
So I'm wondering if you're measuring in many of your studies both. So you're measuring these sort of psychophysiological responses, and you're measuring self-reports. I wonder if you have any a priori hypotheses about which ones should be affected by threat perception, or how they might relate to each other in some instances, but diverge from each other in other instances. So are you measuring them in an exploratory way, or do you have predictions about these different kinds of measures?
Yeah. So in the Boston Marathon studies in particular, we had specific hypotheses about those measures. And we did, after they do the potentiated startle task, they view all the images again and rate how negative they found them and how positive they found them. And we don't find any differences in their self-report ratings. And their self-report ratings don't correlate with like their state anxiety or their somatic symptomology or anything like that. And so I think that's an indicator of what we had, a priori been concerned about, that maybe these self-report measures are in some way biased, or, as you and I discussed the other day, like a restricted scale.
So do you find responses on the startle, on the eye blink, whereas you don't?
Whereas we don't with the self-report about how negative they find the images.
And say more about what you think that means.
I think it means that it means one of two things. I think it could mean that they're not aware of their bodily responses, or they're not paying attention to their bodily responses, even though they're actually using them as a source of information about how they're feeling and about their likelihood of encountering certain types of threats. It could also be the case that they're aware of how they're feeling, but they don't want to admit it, right? That there's some kind of bias in responding. And I'm not sure that I can really tease apart the two here.
What would be great is so descriptively you know what findings are, just a sort of a disjunctive, but if you could see what it predicts, which would be going
Or differentially what it predicts, yeah.
Which would give you actual evidence about what each thing predicts, whether people are aware of their startle or feeling hypervigilant, or even if they aren't, different kinds of outcomes.
Yeah.
So there's a measure of criteria validity.
Yeah. I think so. In some of the other work we've done with like affective reactivity, where we've measured people's self-report and physio at the same time, I feel like they tend to coincide when it's a really potent manipulation. So if their body's really reacting really strongly, and you see like across the board everyone's having these really strong reactions, I think they tend to coincide with their self-report more. And I think part of that's just like interoceptive sensitivity. They're like it reaches conscious awareness in a way that maybe they're always aware of. Where we tend to see disjunction is in these instances where it seems like maybe they wouldn't want to admit how much they're feeling. And so we tend to see more disjunction for like IAPs and IADs, so like looking at evocative pictures or listening to evocative sounds, and more coherence on like a threat task, for instance.
We need to stop there, but I'm sure that I can't stop Joey if you have other questions. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
I gotta run. That's great.
Oh, wonderful.
So yeah, don't take my probing for discussion.
No worries.